It used to be that homeschool kids are behind. Now they're ahead.
It all depends, actually. I think that's what I would say. You probably have some homeschooled kids that shouldn't be getting homeschooled, and I think you have homeschooled kids that are doing a phenomenal job of that.
I think homeschool kids overall do better academically. What do you think?
I don't know about that. I don't know. I think it's extremely variable.
Okay. So she's not going to commit. I see.
I don't know.
She's waffling.
Welcome to the Future of Education podcast, hosted by MacKenzie Price. MacKenzie is the founder of a revolutionary new school model that's disrupting education through AI. Join us as we discuss the latest in education innovation.
What about Waldorf schools?
So I think in general, when we think about Waldorf schools, they have a very kind of holistic approach to education. They were started in the early 20th century by a guy named Rudolf Steiner. And he designed this education system because he was very much against the traditional German one. And he really thought that it should emphasize like artistic expression and storytelling and emotional development, as well as academic stuff. The other thing about Waldorf, and it's especially stark now, is that there's no technology or screens, especially in the early years. Everything is really about creativity, hands-on learning, no technology. They are very anti-technology.
So how is it different from Montessori, Waldorf?
You know, I don't totally understand what the difference is with Montessori and Waldorf, other than I think Waldorf really focuses on a lot of sense of community, a lot of artistic expression, a lot of kind of connectivity within their community. And I think that, you know, as we were talking about with Montessori, they're really trying to create self-directed learners. So again, you're not necessarily seeing as much inner connection with kids. They're moving through their classroom more quietly doing things. And at Waldorf, there's a big emphasis on play and exploration, especially during those early years.
So less focus on rigor than Montessori, you think? You know, like standardized testings?
No, I don't think that's fair to say. I don't think they're less rigorous than Montessori. I think they're just a little bit different, but they are definitely not interested in testing. They have an anti-testing philosophy. I think some of the other cons of Waldorf, I think a lot of people think that having some technology interaction can be good. You know, obviously they are completely on the other end of the spectrum of what we are, which is we're jumping right into technology and
with
using technology with 2-hour learning. Yes.
Right.
But definitely anti-testing for sure.
What do you think the pros are of a Waldorf method? Like why would somebody choose that?
With Waldorf, you know, they really are on this kind of very rigid philosophy of like they kind of delay formal academics, which I think in, you know, as a con is like it kind of delays some of their, you know, their learning, you know, at a faster pace. They don't teach stuff until much later on. It's also, Waldorf is usually private. It's got a reputation as being very expensive generally. And so you have some of that. But as far as some of the, you know, the positives, I think they think it really focuses on creativity and imagination and emotional development. And then again, this really strong sense of community and emphasizing social relationships, both among students as well as among families.
And it's also the complete opposite of, you know, putting people in a box. I think it's letting every kid be who they are. Oh, you like to do X, Y, Z as your child is, you know, into this? Great, we're going to foster that. I could really see the Waldorf and the Montessori, like they're focused on the kid as opposed to what the complaint about traditional school is. You're going to go through the program. We're going to make every kid needs to do this.
Yeah. And Jay, I think that's such a great point. Alternative education models in general. And for the people who are listening to this, again, most of you are saying, yeah, there's something missing from my traditional model. I encourage all of you, go and take a tour of your local Montessori school. Go check out a Waldorf school. Go see what Microschools
out a 2-hour learning school.
Yeah, go check all these out to understand, because again, I think one of the things that's really cool about what's happening in alternative education is that there are people who are just huge proponents of all of these models, right? You're going to find Waldorf families who love it. You'll also find find Waldorf families who don't. Same with Montessori. Same with 2-hour learning, right? It's the biggest thing that is so cool about what we're doing in this environment is that we're providing lots of options for families to find. So if you're a family who's listening to this feeling like, I don't have a choice, I think I would encourage you to just maybe take a look and see what's there. There often is something else in your community that you do have the ability to find. Not to mention the fact that, within the traditional system, a public system, there are charter schools that are able to do things a little bit differently, right? So there are some unique models even within the public system that people can find.
I think that's a great point because you're not against Waldorf or against Montessori or saying that 2-hour learning is against those or opposed or on separate teams. It's like really traditional school with the teacher in front of the classroom with the lecture-based model. It's kind of like that's what you're saying is we need to get away from that. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that can work for every different family to do that.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about.
And I actually think that brings us into kind of the next section of things, which is, for families who've decided, you know what, this traditional way, traditional public school or even private school isn't working. I want to do something like, let's talk about homeschooling. Right?
Oh, yeah. That's
Let's
a big
talk
one.
about homeschooling. Homeschooling is huge. It's a huge part of it. And it's something that, 2-hour learning is going to be providing a homeschooling option as well. But homeschooling is huge. In fact, do you know how big it's gotten?
I can just tell you the word on the street and what like when you hear it, it used to be weird and now it's not. And that's the big groundswell of like public opinion of homeschooling is completely changed. You still have holdouts, but they honestly, those people, they don't know about homeschooling and what it has turned into in the past 10 years. They're stuck in 20-year-old homeschooling from when you and I were a kid.
Yeah.
It's totally different. It is the way.
I agree. I think that when I was growing up, I was born in the 1970s. I think back in that time, a lot of times when people were homeschooling, they were doing it for religious reasons. And now what's happening is you're seeing so many families that are choosing to homeschool for such a large variety of reasons. I think there's like almost 4 million homeschoolers in the U.S. now. It has been a huge explosion.
Wow.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. So first of all, there's a lot of people who just don't like the old traditional system. They're like, this doesn't work. We can do it better. The system hasn't changed. I also think there are a lot of parents who don't like what's being taught.
Not only academically, but socially. A lot of parents don't think that they're doing their kids getting a great education academically and also on the social side.
Well,
it's two things.
There's that. I also think you can't ignore the fact that there are families who want to homeschool their kids because they feel it's safer.
Of course.
Traditional or big schools with all that's going on in those hallways, everything from gun violence to just the bullying and the behavior issues that are happening. There's a whole plethora of reasons that people are saying, hey, I'm exiting the system. Oh. I want my children to be educated with me at home. I want to do this now. But, and here's the thing, anyone who's listening, who's even thinking about homeschool, you have your own reason why you're thinking, I want to homeschool. So what I'd like to focus a little more on is like where homeschooling has some things really going right for it. Okay?
Yes. Before you say that, I want to say another big reason for homeschooling is that parents want to spend that key time with their children. A lot of parents, and you hear especially moms, go, I miss my kid all day. I feel like other people, even well-meaning teachers who definitely love their students, they don't love them like a parent will. So it's like a lot of parents, especially younger, like, why am I having, quote, someone else raise my child in these key formative years? And I look at 90% of the time my child is spending is with somebody else. And maybe they're great, best case scenario, but a lot of times they're not. And that teacher may be imparting belief systems there, even without even realizing it. We're all human. So teachers are imparting some of their beliefs. Hopefully it's good, but that's a big reason I personally think.
It absolutely is. Parents want to be in control of what their children are doing. They want to spend the time with them. They want to be able to decide what and how they're learning. They want to have flexibility, flexibility to travel, flexibility to go according to their schedules, have that time where they spend together, and provide that kind of personalized attention. The other thing that a lot of homeschoolers do is they're able to say, hey, I have a kid who really is interested in this. We can go down that rabbit hole. We have so much more flexibility flexibility about the focus of what that is. So there's a lot of reasons that homeschooling is happening. I will tell you, one of the things that homeschoolers have known for a long time that is very much based on my philosophy of education.
I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say.
Say it then.
You don't have to sit a kid in class for 7 or 8 hours a day to teach them academics to succeed and even excel at academics. You don't need to, quote, waste 8 hours a day doing that. You can do it much shorter and better and more efficiently in 2, maybe even 3 hours a day for high school kids.
Yep. Homeschooling parents have known you can absolutely get academics done in such a faster amount of time. Now, I think we should also talk about some of the myths about homeschooling. And then I want to go into some of the cons. One of the other things that I think is really important that we should talk about when it comes to homeschooling, we talked about how they were considered weird. Another, I think it's really become a myth now, is that homeschoolers are isolated. The homeschooling community has really gotten, as they've gotten bigger, they've connected in so many ways. So there are, for example, a lot of homeschooling co-ops where, 3 days a week, kids are coming into a group area together, and 2 days a week they're doing schooling at home.
They're doing sports together. They have they play other homeschools. Like my friend who has 10 kids and lives in Loudoun County, I think it's called the homeschooling capital of the world. They're like in this vast network to where like they have sports leagues and they have everything. Yeah. And they go to co-ops. It's awesome. A lot of close curriculum things, or they'll do hiking together or whatever, things like that.
So I think that's one thing that if you're someone who's thinking about homeschooling, but you're like, oh, I don't know, it seems like it's isolating for parents or for kids or whatever, that's really not the case anymore. There's so much community around that. So that's what I will say.
Not your parents' homeschool.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the cons, though. So one of the big cons is, let's talk about some of the challenges that come with homeschooling, though. So in general, homeschooling has been considered very parent intensive, right? It's the parent is deciding, hey, I'm going to take on homeschooling my kid.
I can't teach chemistry. What the heck?
And I will tell you, for me, that was one of the reasons that when I was first deciding what to do with my kids, I'm like, I don't want to homeschool. I'm not interested in doing this. Remember, I was the one who hated school growing up. So back then I was like, I don't want to homeschool. That's part of why I've created 2-Hour Learning, which really outsources the academics, right? So that we're giving it to...
But that's been around for a long time, because even there's been programs that homeschoolers could buy, even VHS tapes back in the day, to where you would learn with a kind of a virtual teacher. But you do miss that interaction, I would think.
I will say, from the experience I've seen with so many families that I know that have homeschooled, the parent is taking a very, very active role in learning. And oftentimes they'll also get to the point where, they're not experts in a subject. Now, usually by that point, if they've had a successful homeschool experience, the kids are able to kind of get to that next level. But that's one thing. And also, because it's time intensive, I think a lot of challenges that people find with homeschooling is like, hey, I work full time, or I need to go and make income. I can't be the one doing the homeschooling thing. So it's something to think about.
Can a parent homeschool if they're working from home? Let's say the dad works on site and he goes to an office every day, but the mom works at home with a full-time job. Could she homeschool one child in the 3rd grade?
Well, I think it all depends on what type of curriculum you're using. Now, I believe we are launching our 2-Hour Learning homeschool program, which would enable that, because we are having the program be really the AI tutor.
Your answer is
the answer is yes, but I don't know about traditional homeschooling. I don't know that that's the case. I think that now, actually, I shouldn't say that. I think there are people who are working full time and doing that. Here's the other challenge with that has been presented with homeschooling is it's very variable how rigorous the academic education is.
There's a lot of variance between homeschool kids and how well they do on tests.
A lot of variance.
And how well the parents, how involved. So you can't lump them all together.
Yes, you cannot do that. However, what I will say is that, homeschoolers are getting accepted to all types of colleges. I think Stanford University estimates about 5% of their student body was homeschooled.
Wow. It used to be that homeschool kids are behind. Now they're ahead.
It all depends, actually. I think that's what I would say. You probably have some homeschooled kids that shouldn't be getting homeschooled, and I think you have homeschooled kids that are doing a phenomenal job.
But by and large, the percentage of homeschool kids, I would say, and this is my totally unscientific popping off method, which is very reputable, peer-reviewed, data studies. I think homeschool kids overall do better academically. What do you think?
I don't know about that. I don't know. I think it's extremely variable.
Okay. So she's not going to commit. I see.
I don't know.
She's waffling.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, let's talk about like a whole next level that goes even beyond homeschooling. Have you heard about unschooling?
I have. We're just getting weirder and weirder and weirder. Like we started a little weird and now we're saying, oh, homeschooling's not that weird anymore, but unschooling, that's the new homeschooling, to where that really is weird.
So I think it is a more radical approach to alternative education. However, and actually about 20% of homeschoolers would classify themselves as unschoolers.
What is unschooling?
So unschooling it's gone really kind of viral. There's a lot of actually very popular unschoolers that talk about what this is. In fact, they think it's doubled in just the last 2 years. But it's based on this idea that children are naturally curious, which I absolutely believe they are, and that they'll learn what they need to learn through exploring their own interests and experiences rather than following a set curriculum. So, take an example. Your 5-year-old loves digging in the dirt and finding worms and bugs and things like that. And so you know what? We end up going on a whole adventure where we learn everything we can about worms and bugs and the things that's happening. And then that might lead into like, well, how do worms and bugs get eaten by who? Well, they get eaten by birds. Let's study the birds. Let's do those types of things. Or I love to cook. I'm enjoying cooking. And from that, I'm learning math skills by measuring and things like that. A lot of outdoors time, right? A lot of things like that. Like, let's let kids kind of be self-led in their exploration and what they do.
So unschooling is defined by no curriculum. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's not necessarily a set curriculum. Now, I do believe that unschoolers, again, there's wild variability. I saw a very scary TikTok video a number of months ago with a woman who was like amazed that her 6-year-old had written a couple of little tiny words and clearly like doesn't really know the ABCs, but is starting to do something. And I think that can be a little scary. But I also know some incredible unschoolers who are really thoughtful in their approach to their child's education, but they very much are saying, hey, let's let the kids' interest kind of lead this, and then let's figure out ways to incorporate the academic learning from this. So, you can take that same kid who's interested in bugs, and pretty soon they're learning about photosynthesis and they're learning about, science stuff. There's a lot, but I think it takes a certain type of parent who's really being intentional and thoughtful about their child's education.
Sounds more hands-on even than regular homeschooling, or what?
It's actually kind of interesting. I think this is something that, again, I'm not an expert in unschooling or homeschooling. I think some people use unschooling as a way to be even more hands-off, and some people who are doing it really well are probably even more hands-on. They're just letting their kid have a great time and
teaching them along the way.
And teaching them as they're doing that. And so I think there's a lot of great things. It's very much a free-spirited way of growing up. There was a movie. Did you ever see the movie? It was called Captain Fantastic, maybe? Anyways, it was a very interesting example of kind of unschooling, but it was like kids are living in, the wilderness, and that's how they're kind of learning, and yet they're reading and they're doing all these things. So I think there's a lot that we can look at. And again, something to see all of these methods of education are something that you as a parent should look into it, learn about it, and kind of go in with a thoughtful game plan of like, this is something I could do. I will tell you, for me personally, one of the things that I do looking at all of these different types of education is because I do care about academic rigor. I want my students at my schools to graduate from high school prepared to do whatever they want to do. And if that means they want to go to an Ivy League college, they can do that. And that means they want to go straight into the working world, they can do that. But as part of all of that gamut of opportunity, I think good academics is something that's important. Now, there are a lot of families. In fact, I was just talking to a head of an education department at one of the top universities in the country, and I asked her, how do you decide if a school is a good school? And her answer was, if the families are happy, then I consider it a good school. If the families are happy. And I will say I disagree with that because I think there are a lot of happy families who are absolutely clueless about what is going on in their child's school. They're completely clueless. They think things are good. I send my kid to school every day. They come home, they get report cards. There's no idea if there's good learning going on,
Right.
what they're learning, if they're being prepared with life skills and all of that. I think ignorance is bliss a lot of times. So I disagree with her. I do not believe that the deciding factor on whether a school is a good school is if the family is happy.
Did you challenge her there?
I did.
What'd you say?
I said exactly that.
And what'd she say?
It was kind of one of those like mic drop moments. Oops.
Okay, so we've gone over a lot of these alternative educations. We haven't necessarily done a deep dive into your version of alternative education, which is the future of education, right? It's called 2-hour learning. We saved it for last because it's the best, of course, right?
I absolutely think it's the best.
But we still love the others, but this is the best, and we're standing by that. So tell me, what is 2-hour learning?
So 2-hour learning is the academic platform for K through 12 school. Okay. And 2-hour learning can be done in a variety of ways. It can be digested from a full-time in-person brick and mortar school. It can be done online. It can be done as a homeschool program. There's a ton of options for how 2-hour learning is done. But basically, what we have done is we've created an AI tutor, and we use adaptive apps in order to provide every student with their one-to-one personalized mastery-based education program. And so we don't have academic teachers with 2-hour learning.
One thing that's important to note about the 2-hour learning method is, although you don't have academic teachers, you do have adult guides who are extremely important to what happens. And a lot of people say that online is like, no teachers, well, the kids just can't learn then. It's like, well, they learn through the AI apps, but the adult guides are there for motivation and encouragement, which to me is a phenomenal concept. It's just, they're freed up.
And that's what we've done in all of our in-person schools. And then for our homeschooling program, we've actually built a lot of those motivation measures into the program itself.
That parents can use, or whoever.
Well, it's actually part of the program. It's part of the program. So even if the parent does absolutely nothing at home to motivate their student whatsoever, that's actually been the biggest thing with our homeschool program to get right is we can't control what the parent does. We can't. We don't have the ability to go into someone's home and control how a parent chooses to motivate or whatever. So that's one of the things we've done is we've built the motivational model within the program so that it truly is kind of a plug-and-play system.
I love that.
So that's what 2-hour learning is. Now, what I have done is we've been able to build a bunch of different types of schools off of 2-hour learning because the reason it's called 2-hour learning is because it only takes 2 hours for kids to learn twice as fast as kids in a traditional classroom. And of course, then the question is, what do you do? What do you do during the rest of the day? Right. So we have a bunch of different types of schools. We have one school, the first school that we started is called Alpha School. And Alpha is a school where kids engage in general life skills workshops in the afternoon. We also have a school called Sports Academy. And at Sports Academy, guess what? The kids are learning life skills through sports and sports-themed workshops. We have a GT school. It's a gifted and talented school where students there are spending their afternoons doing really academically rigorous workshops where they're learning life skills. But they're doing it in things like robotics and coding and chess and writing books and poetry, things that are a little bit more academically inclined for that. We have another school called Next Gen Academy that's using kids' love of gaming and esports to drive incredible academic results. And then we're also getting into the charter world with 2-hour learning. Now, 2-hour learning is also something that another private school could come in and say, we're going to license 2-hour learning, and then we'll do whatever we want in the afternoon. The sky's really the limit when you think about this idea that in only 2 hours a day, kids can crush their academics, and then they spend the rest of the time. So that also goes into homeschool. Homeschoolers can use 2-hour learning. And the big advantage there is it's not as parent intensive because they are allowing 2-hour learning to do the teaching of the student as opposed to them managing that. And then, of course, they've got the rest of the day to do those things too. So when we talk about all these other options, we are like a micro school, right? All of our schools so far are smaller. They're less than 250 students. We are both an online option as well as a full-time in-person option. We have also got a homeschooling option. We have a lot of similarities to things like Montessori, where we really believe in self-directed learning and life skills development, with Waldorf School, because we absolutely believe in fostering creativity and emotional and social development, all types of things. I think with so much of the homeschooling and unschooling thing, let's let kids figure out how to find their passions and their interests. So I think what I've done is sort of taken a lot of the best of all these different models of alternative education and put it. But I will say, from an academic perspective, we are very committed to rigorous results. So at our schools, we want kids to learn twice as fast as students in traditional education. We want them to learn life skills, and we want them to love school, because that is what it all comes down to. To be successful as a student, you got to have a motivated student, and that's one of the things we work through.
People don't talk about, I feel like, with traditional school while it's failing. Like we say, traditional school's failing, their model is broken. It's because students aren't motivated to learn in that. So we can argue all day long about whether traditional school is broken or not, but students don't care. They're not motivated to learn. And in order to motivate them to learn, you have to find where their passion is. And I believe that's what 2-hour learning does very well.
It does in some ways, but I actually would say too, the problems with traditional education go further than that. You can have a motivated student who wants to learn, and if they're not being given the right level and pace of education,
they then quickly become an unmotivated student.
Well, that's true.
You see what I'm saying?
And no, I agree. I can see that.
Yeah.
Motivation is definitely a huge problem on there, but we could do a whole other podcast if you want me to list on and on about all the problems with traditional education. But today's podcast was really focused on, if you're a parent who wants to understand what some other ways of education are, go check these out. So I would encourage you to get on the internet and say, what are the other types of schools in my local community, and go check them out and learn them, because there's so many cool things to do. So I hope this answered a lot of your questions about different models of education. I'd love to hear from you. So you can DM me on Future of Education on Instagram or on Facebook. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what some of the other alternative education options are that you think I have missed or where I've gotten it wrong. But most importantly, just understand that there are so many more options available for our kids than there used to be. And I hope this will be a great resource for you as you find out what to do. Because remember, kids are limitless. It is our job to help unlock that potential.
Thanks for listening to MacKenzie Price and the Future of Education podcast. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, now is the time to do it, so you can stay up to date on all our episodes. You can connect with MacKenzie on social media and be part of our daily conversation over on Instagram at futureof_education. For more info about the show and our guests, you can always visit futureofeducationpod.com. Lastly, if you're loving what you're learning, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.